This video is for educational purposes only and does not constitute investment advice. I need to tell you about the night I lost everything. Not metaphorically, literally everything. It was February 15th, 2019, and I was sitting in my car outside a 7-Eleven at 2:30 in the morning, watching my entire financial empire crumble on my phone screen. 3 years of what I thought was brilliant strategy, gone in 72 hours. But here's what I discovered in that parking lot that changed everything I thought I knew about success. And it's going to challenge every assumption you have about what actually matters in life. You see, I thought I was smart. Really smart. I had spreadsheets that would make Goldman Sachs analysts weep with envy. I had algorithms tracking market patterns going back decades. I had a strategy so sophisticated that I genuinely believed I had found a way to game the system. I was making moves that looked like genius to everyone around me. My friends called me the wizard. My family thought I was the next Warren Buffett. I had convinced myself that intelligence and strategy were all that mattered. But sitting there in that parking lot, staring at my phone showing a balance of negative $47,000, I realized something that would fundamentally reshape how I understood success. Strategy without discipline is just expensive entertainment. And I'm about to show you why this distinction will determine whether you win or lose at everything that matters to you. Let me take you back to 1912, to a moment that perfectly illustrates what I'm talking about. Two teams of explorers are racing to become the first to reach the South Pole. Both have brilliant strategies. Both have exceptional equipment. Both have experienced leaders. But only one team understood the difference between having a plan and having discipline. And that difference would literally determine who lived and who died. Captain Robert Falcon Scott led the British team. His strategy was flawless on paper. He had motorized sledges, ponies, and dogs. He had studied every previous Antarctic expedition. He had calculated fuel depots, food rations, and weather patterns with scientific precision. His plan was so detailed that it filled multiple journals. Everyone expected him to win easily. But here's what Scott didn't understand. He thought strategy could overcome discipline. When the motorized sledges broke down earlier than expected, instead of sticking to his backup plan, he improvised. When the ponies struggled in conditions he hadn't fully prepared them for, he changed his approach mid-journey. When his team wanted to rest longer at certain camps because they were tired, he let them. Every decision seemed logical in the moment. Every adjustment appeared strategic. Meanwhile, Roald Amundsen, leading the Norwegian team, had a different approach entirely. His strategy was actually simpler. Dogs and skis, that's it. But here's what made all the difference. Amundsen had spent 2 years living with Eskimos, learning not just techniques, but discipline. He had trained his team to wake up at exactly the same time every day, regardless of weather, regardless of how they felt, regardless of circumstances. They would travel exactly 15 nautical miles per day. Not 14, not 16, 15. Every single day. When I first learned this story, I thought Amundsen was just lucky. I mean, Scott's strategy was clearly more sophisticated, right? More tools, more options, more flexibility. But I was missing the point entirely, just like I missed it in my own life until that night in the parking lot. You want to know what happened? Amundsen reached the South Pole 34 days before Scott. But that's not the devastating part. Scott and his entire team died on the return journey. They ran out of food 11 miles from a supply depot. 11 miles. They were so close to salvation they could probably smell it, but they didn't have the discipline to push through one more day. Amundsen's team? They returned home so efficiently that they had food left over. Not because they were lucky, not because the weather was better for them, but because discipline had created a predictable system that strategy alone could never match. Now here's where this gets personal, and I need you to really hear this. I spent 3 years building what I thought was an unbeatable trading strategy. I had back-tested it against every market condition since 1987. I had multiple contingency plans for different scenarios. I had risk management protocols that looked bulletproof. On paper, I was Amundsen with better equipment. But I didn't have the discipline. When my system said sell, but the market looked like it might turn around, I held on. When my rules said take profits, but I felt like I could squeeze out more, I stayed in. When my risk management said stop trading for the day after 3 losses, I convinced myself that the fourth trade would be different. Every violation of my system felt strategic in the moment. I always had a good reason. And that's exactly why I lost everything. Not because my strategy was bad. My strategy was actually excellent. I lost everything because I lacked the discipline to follow it. I had confused being smart with being disciplined, and that confusion cost me everything I had worked for. But here's what I discovered that night that changed my life forever. And this is the part that's going to revolutionize how you think about success. Discipline isn't just following rules. Discipline is the compound interest of human behavior. Let me explain what I mean. You know how Einstein supposedly called compound interest the most powerful force in the universe? Well, he never actually said that, but the principle is still true. When you invest money and it grows, and then that growth generates its own growth, you create an exponential curve that defies intuition. A penny doubled every day for 30 days doesn't become 30 cents. It becomes over $5 million. Discipline works the exact same way. Every time you do what you're supposed to do when you don't feel like doing it, you're not just completing a task. You're building a system that makes the next right decision easier. You're creating momentum that compounds over time. You're developing what I call disciplinary momentum, and it's the most underestimated force in human achievement. Think about this. When Amundsen's team woke up on day 47 of their journey, exhausted and facing a brutal headwind, they didn't have to debate whether to continue. The decision was already made. They had trained their discipline so thoroughly that the right choice was automatic. They saved all their mental energy for execution instead of wasting it on decision fatigue. Scott's team, meanwhile, was constantly negotiating with themselves. Should we push harder today? Should we rest longer? Should we adjust the route? Every decision required willpower, and willpower is a finite resource. By the time they needed it most, they had already spent it all on choices that discipline could have made automatic. I learned this lesson the hard way, but once I understood it, everything changed. After losing everything, I spent 6 months developing what I call disciplinary systems. Not strategies, systems. The difference is crucial, and I'm going to show you exactly what I mean. A strategy is a plan for achieving a goal. A system is a set of disciplined behaviors that make achieving goals inevitable. Strategy focuses on outcomes. Systems focus on processes. Strategy requires constant decision-making. Systems eliminate decisions through predefined rules. Here's exactly what I did, and I want you to pay attention because this is where most people get it wrong. I didn't create a better trading strategy. I created a system of discipline that made any reasonable strategy work automatically. I set up my environment so that following my rules required less energy than breaking them. First, I moved my computer to a different room and unplugged the monitor every night. This meant that if I wanted to make an impulsive trade, I would have to walk to another room, plug everything in, and wait for the system to boot up. Those 2 minutes of friction gave my rational mind time to catch up with my emotional impulses. Second, I created what I call commitment devices. I gave my business partner permission to change my trading account password if I violated any of our predetermined rules. I set up automatic transfers so that any profits above a certain threshold would immediately move to a separate account that I couldn't access for 30 days. I made breaking my discipline more painful than following it. Third, and this is the part that really transformed everything, I started tracking my discipline separately from my results. I kept a daily score based purely on whether I followed my system, regardless of whether I made or lost money. This completely changed my focus from trying to predict outcomes to perfecting processes. But here's what really blew my mind. Within 6 months, I had not only recovered my losses, I had exceeded my previous peak by over 200%. Not because I had a better strategy. I was using essentially the same approach I had used before. But now I had the discipline to follow it consistently. And consistency is where the magic happens. You see, most people think success comes from having breakthrough moments, the perfect strategy, the brilliant insight, the lucky break. But that's not how it actually works. Success comes from doing boring things consistently over long periods of time. It comes from showing up when you don't feel like it. It comes from following your system when your emotions are screaming at you to do something else. Let me give you another historical example that perfectly illustrates this principle. In 1928, Alexander Fleming discovered penicillin completely by accident. He had left some bacterial cultures uncovered in his lab, and when he returned from vacation, he noticed that mold had killed the bacteria in one of the dishes. This accidental discovery would eventually save millions of lives and revolutionize medicine. Now, most people focus on the lucky accident part of this story. They think Fleming succeeded because he was in the right place at the right time. But that completely misses the point. Fleming didn't discover penicillin because he was lucky. He discovered it because he had the discipline to maintain meticulous lab practices every single day for years. You see, Fleming had a habit of examining every culture dish before throwing it away, even the ones that appeared ruined. Most scientists would have just discarded the contaminated dishes without a second look. But Fleming had trained himself to always look, always observe, always pay attention, regardless of whether he expected to find anything interesting. That discipline, practiced consistently over years, positioned him to recognize the significance of what others would have missed. The opportunity was always there. The mold had probably contaminated cultures in labs around the world thousands of times. But only Fleming had developed the disciplined observation habits that allowed him to see what was right in front of everyone else. This is the difference between people who succeed and people who don't. It's not that successful people get more opportunities. It's that they develop the discipline to recognize and act on opportunities that everyone else misses. I see this pattern everywhere once you know what to look for. Ray Kroc didn't become successful because he invented a better hamburger. McDonald's food wasn't revolutionary. But Kroc had the discipline to systematize every aspect of the restaurant business in ways that no one else had attempted. He created processes that could be replicated exactly, anywhere in the world, by anyone willing to follow the system. Jeff Bezos didn't succeed because he predicted the internet would be big. Lots of people saw that coming. He succeeded because he had the discipline to focus obsessively on customer experience for decades. Even when investors and analysts thought he was crazy for prioritizing growth over profits, Warren Buffett didn't become wealthy because he had better stock picks than everyone else. His returns are good, but not supernatural. He became wealthy because he had the discipline to stick with his investment philosophy for over 50 years, never deviating even when other approaches seemed more exciting or profitable in the short term. The pattern is always the same. Strategy gets you started. Discipline gets you there. But here's where it gets really interesting, and this is something I didn't understand until I started studying the psychology behind discipline. Most people think discipline is about willpower. They think it's about forcing yourself to do things you don't want to do through sheer mental strength. But that's completely wrong, and it's why most people fail when they try to become more disciplined. Willpower is finite. It gets depleted throughout the day. It's weaker when you're tired, stressed, or emotional. Building a life that depends on willpower is like building a house on quicksand. It might work for a while, but eventually it's going to collapse. Real discipline isn't about willpower. It's about creating systems that make the right choices automatic. It's about designing your environment so that good decisions require less energy than bad decisions. It's about building habits that run on autopilot instead of conscious effort. Let me show you exactly what I mean with a concrete example from my own life. After I rebuilt my trading business, I wanted to expand into other areas. I had always wanted to write a book, but every time I tried, I would start strong and then gradually lose momentum. I would blame it on not having enough time, or not feeling inspired, or not knowing what to write about. But the real problem was that I was relying on motivation instead of discipline. I was waiting to feel like writing, instead of creating a system that made writing inevitable. So I applied the same principles that had worked in trading to writing, and the results were immediate and dramatic. Instead of trying to write when I felt like it, I committed to writing for exactly 30 minutes every morning at 5 a.m. before I checked email or did anything else. I didn't set a word count goal. I didn't worry about quality. I just had to sit at my desk with a blank document open for 30 minutes. That's it. The first week was brutal. I would sit there staring at the screen, feeling like I was wasting time. But I stuck with it because the commitment was so small that breaking it would have felt ridiculous. 30 minutes. Anyone can do anything for 30 minutes. But here's what happened. After about 2 weeks, something shifted. I started looking forward to those 30 minutes. Not because writing had suddenly become easy, but because I had trained my brain to expect creative work at that time. My subconscious started preparing material while I was sleeping. Ideas would pop up at random times throughout the day, and I would write them down for the next morning. Within 6 months, I had completed my first book. Not because I was more motivated than before, not because I had found more time, but because I had created a system that made consistent progress inevitable. The discipline of showing up every day, regardless of how I felt, had compound interests that I never could have predicted. And this is where most people get discipline completely wrong. They think it's about big, dramatic gestures. They think it's about making huge changes all at once. They think it's about forcing themselves to do things they hate. But that's not discipline. That's just setting yourself up for failure. Real discipline is boring. It's showing up consistently for small things. It's building systems that make good choices easier than bad choices. It's focusing on process instead of outcomes. It's treating discipline like a skill that can be developed rather than a character trait that you either have or don't have. Let me tell you about another historical figure who understood this better than almost anyone. His name was Cal Ripken Jr., and he played baseball for the Baltimore Orioles. Now, you might be wondering what a baseball player has to teach us about discipline and success, but stick with me because this story is going to change how you think about consistency forever. Ripken played in 2,632 consecutive games over 17 years. That's every single game for 17 years straight. No sick days. No rest days. No, I don't feel like it days. Rain or shine, healthy or injured, motivated or exhausted, he showed up and performed at the highest level. Now, here's what's interesting about Ripken's streak. It wasn't about being superhuman. He got sick during those 17 years. He got injured. He had personal problems. He had days when he absolutely didn't want to be at the ballpark. But he had developed a system of discipline that made showing up automatic, regardless of circumstances. Ripken's secret wasn't that he loved baseball more than other players. It was that he had made playing baseball a non-negotiable part of his identity. He didn't decide each day whether or not to show up. That decision was made once, 17 years earlier, and then he just executed the system he had created. But here's the part that really matters for your life. Ripken didn't just break records because of his consecutive game streak. He became a better player because of it. The discipline of showing up every day, even when conditions weren't perfect, forced him to develop skills and mental toughness that occasional players never develop. His consistency created capabilities that strategy alone could never have produced. This is the compound interest of discipline in action. Every day that Ripken showed up, he wasn't just maintaining a streak. He was building mental and physical systems that made him more effective in all areas of his performance. He was training his body to function under any conditions. He was developing problem-solving skills that only come from facing challenges consistently over time. And this brings me to what I consider the most important insight about discipline that most people never understand. Discipline isn't just about achieving your goals. Discipline changes who you become in the process of achieving those goals. Strategy focuses on getting what you want. Discipline focuses on becoming the kind of person who naturally gets what you want. When I was focused purely on strategy, I was trying to game the system. I was looking for shortcuts, angles, ways to get results without paying the full price. But strategy without discipline is like trying to withdraw money from an account where you haven't made any deposits. You might get lucky once or twice, but eventually the account goes empty. Discipline, on the other hand, is like making daily deposits into a compound interest account. Each deposit seems small and insignificant. You can't see the progress day by day. But over time, those small deposits create wealth that strategy alone could never match. Let me give you a modern example that perfectly illustrates this principle. There's a guy named James Clear who wrote a book called Atomic Habits. Before he became famous as a productivity expert, he was just a college baseball player who suffered a serious injury that ended his athletic career. He could have focused on strategy. He could have looked for shortcuts to rebuild his life quickly. Instead, he focused on discipline. He committed to writing one article every Monday and Thursday for years. Not when he felt inspired. Not when he had something important to say. Just every Monday and Thursday, regardless of circumstances. He didn't start with a grand strategy to become a best-selling author. He just had the discipline to show up consistently. That discipline created opportunities that no amount of strategic planning could have predicted. The consistent writing improved his thinking. The regular publishing built an audience. The forced deadlines developed his skills. After several years of this disciplined practice, publishers started reaching out to him. Speaking opportunities appeared. The book deal came naturally. But here's what I find most interesting about Clear's story. He didn't succeed because he had a better strategy than other aspiring writers. He succeeded because he developed the discipline to execute any strategy consistently over time. The discipline became the strategy. This is what I discovered in my own life after losing everything and rebuilding. The specific tactics I used weren't nearly as important as my commitment to follow them consistently. I could have used dozens of different approaches and succeeded as long as I had the discipline to stick with one approach long enough for compound interest to work. But most people never give themselves that chance. They hop from strategy to strategy, looking for the perfect system, never realizing that their lack of discipline is the real problem. They read every book, attend every seminar, buy every course, but they never develop the boring, unglamorous habit of doing the same productive things every day for months and years. And this is where I need to get really honest with you about something that most success content never addresses. Discipline is not equally difficult for everyone. Some people have advantages that make discipline easier. Some people have circumstances that make it harder. But here's what I've learned after studying this for years. Discipline is a skill, not a talent. It can be developed by anyone willing to start small and build systematically. The key is understanding that discipline is like a muscle. If you try to lift too much weight on your first day at the gym, you'll hurt yourself and quit. But if you start with weights that are almost embarrassingly light and gradually increase the load, you can eventually lift things that seemed impossible when you started. Most people try to develop discipline by taking on huge challenges immediately. They decide to wake up at 5 a.m. when they usually wake up at 9. They commit to working out every day when they currently work out never. They promise to read for 2 hours when they currently read for 0 minutes. This approach fails because it requires more willpower than anyone has. The better approach is to start so small that failure is almost impossible, and then gradually increase the difficulty as your discipline muscle gets stronger. Want to start exercising? Commit to putting on your workout clothes every day at the same time. That's it. Don't worry about actually working out. Just put on the clothes. Want to start writing? Commit to opening a blank document and writing 1 sentence every morning. 1 sentence. Anyone can write 1 sentence. But that 1 sentence creates momentum. It establishes a routine. It starts building the neural pathways that will eventually make writing feel automatic. Want to improve your diet? Don't eliminate everything you enjoy. Just commit to drinking 1 glass of water before every meal. That single habit will start changing your relationship with food in ways you can't predict. And it's so easy that you have no excuse not to do it. This is how real discipline develops. Not through dramatic willpower, but through strategic laziness. You make the right choice so easy that doing it requires less energy than thinking about it. But here's where this gets really interesting, and this is something I didn't understand until I started tracking my own behavior patterns. Discipline in one area of your life automatically improves discipline in other areas. It's like your brain has a general discipline operating system that gets stronger every time you exercise it, regardless of the specific activity. When I developed discipline around my trading system, I noticed that I also became more disciplined about exercise, diet, relationships, and personal projects. I wasn't trying to improve these other areas, but the mental muscles I was building through consistent trading behavior were transferring to everything else I did. Scientists call this transfer effect, and it's one of the most underestimated aspects of personal development. When you prove to yourself that you can stick to commitments in one area, your brain starts believing that you're the kind of person who sticks to commitments in general. Your identity shifts from someone who struggles with follow-through to someone who finishes what they start. This identity shift is more powerful than any strategy because it changes how you see yourself at a fundamental level. Instead of having to convince yourself to do the right thing, you start doing the right thing because it's consistent with who you believe you are. Let me tell you about a study that perfectly illustrates this principle. Researchers wanted to understand why some people stick with exercise programs while others quit. They followed 2 groups of people who started identical fitness routines. The only difference was how the researchers described the participants to themselves. One group was told they were people who exercise. The other group was told they were people who are trying to exercise. Same routine, same goals, same support systems. but completely different identity frames. The results were dramatic. The people who thought of themselves as exercisers had a 91% adherence rate after 6 months. The people who thought of themselves as trying to exercise had only a 31% adherence rate. The only difference was their identity, but that difference changed everything about their behavior. This is why discipline is so much more powerful than strategy. Strategy changes what you do. Discipline changes who you are. And who you are determines what you do automatically, without conscious effort, over the long term. When I was focused on strategy, I was always fighting against my own impulses. I would make good decisions when I was motivated and disciplined, but as soon as I got tired or stressed or emotional, I would revert to old patterns. I was trying to impose a strategy on an identity that wasn't aligned with that strategy. But when I focused on building discipline first, something fundamentally different happened. The discipline changed my identity. I stopped seeing myself as someone who was trying to be successful, and started seeing myself as someone who was successful through consistent daily actions. This identity shift made the right choices feel natural instead of forced. Now, I need to address something that might be bothering you right now. You might be thinking that this all sounds great in theory, but you've tried to be more disciplined before and it didn't work. You might be wondering if you're just not cut out for this kind of consistency. You might be worried that you don't have enough willpower to make this kind of change. If that's what you're thinking, I have good news for you. Every person I've ever met who has developed strong discipline has failed at it multiple times before succeeding. Myself included. The difference between people who eventually develop discipline and people who don't isn't that they're naturally more disciplined. It's that they understand that failure is part of the learning process, not evidence that they should quit. When I first started rebuilding my trading business, I broke my own rules constantly. I would follow my system for a few days, then make an emotional decision that wiped out my progress. I would commit to specific behaviors, then find excuses to skip them when they became inconvenient. I failed at discipline far more often than I succeeded in the beginning. But here's what I learned that changed everything. Each failure was giving me information about what wasn't working in my system. Instead of seeing failure as evidence that I lacked discipline, I started seeing it as feedback about how to design better systems. When I broke my trading rules because of emotional impulses, I didn't conclude that I was too emotional to trade. I concluded that I needed better emotional regulation systems. When I skipped my morning routine because I was tired, I didn't conclude that I wasn't a morning person. I concluded that I needed to go to bed earlier or design an easier morning routine. This shift in perspective is crucial because it changes failure from a reason to quit into a reason to improve your approach. You're not trying to force yourself to be someone you're not. You're designing systems that work with your natural tendencies instead of against them. Let me give you a concrete example of how this works. One of my clients was struggling to maintain a consistent exercise routine. She would start strong, work out for a few weeks, then gradually stop when life got busy or stressful. She had concluded that she just wasn't disciplined enough to stick with exercise. But when we analyzed what was actually happening, we discovered that her system was fighting against her natural patterns instead of working with them. She was trying to work out in the evening after work, when she was already tired and had a million other things to think about. She was trying to go to the gym, which required extra time for travel and preparation. She was trying to do intense workouts that left her exhausted the next day. Every part of her system required maximum willpower at times when her willpower was already depleted. No wonder she couldn't stick with it. The problem wasn't her level of discipline. The problem was that she had designed a system that required superhuman discipline to maintain. So we redesigned everything to work with her natural energy and schedule patterns. Instead of evening workouts, she committed to 10 minutes of movement immediately after waking up. Instead of going to the gym, she created a simple bodyweight routine that could be done in her bedroom. Instead of intense workouts, she focused on consistency over intensity. The results were immediate and lasting. Within 3 months, she was exercising more consistently than she ever had in her life. Not because she had developed superhuman willpower, but because she had created a system that made exercise easier than not exercising. This is the real secret of discipline that most people never understand. It's not about forcing yourself to do things you don't want to do. It's about designing your life so that the things you want to do long-term become easier than the things you want to do short-term. And this brings me to what I consider the most important distinction in all of personal development. There's a difference between what you want and what you want to want. Most people spend their entire lives trying to force themselves to want things they think they should want, instead of designing systems that automatically move them toward what they actually want long term. For example, you might want to eat healthy food, but in any given moment, you want to eat whatever tastes good right now. The key isn't to force yourself to want healthy food in the moment. The key is to design your environment so that healthy food is more convenient and accessible than unhealthy food. You might want to save money, but in any given moment, you want to buy something that catches your attention. The key isn't to force yourself to stop wanting things. The key is to set up automatic systems that save money before you have a chance to spend it. You might want to build a business, but in any given moment, you want to relax and watch Netflix. The key isn't to force yourself to stop enjoying relaxation. The key is to create systems that make business-building activities so routine that they happen automatically, leaving plenty of time for relaxation afterward. This approach works because it aligns with how your brain actually functions instead of fighting against it. Your brain is designed to seek immediate pleasure and avoid immediate pain. That's not a character flaw. That's evolution. Fighting against this tendency is like fighting against gravity. You can do it temporarily with enough effort, but eventually you're going to lose. But you can use this tendency to your advantage if you understand how to design the right systems. Make the long-term beneficial choice immediately pleasurable. Make the long-term harmful choice immediately painful. Structure your environment so that your natural impulses pull you toward your goals instead of away from them. This is what I mean when I say that discipline is the edge. It's not that disciplined people have better strategies than everyone else. It's that they've learned how to create systems that make executing any strategy sustainable over time. They've learned how to work with their human nature instead of against it. And here's something that might surprise you about extremely disciplined people. They actually make fewer decisions than less disciplined people, not more. They've automated so many aspects of their lives that they save their decision-making energy for the things that really matter. Think about it this way. If you have to decide every morning whether or not to exercise, you're using willpower. If you automatically put on your workout clothes at the same time every day without thinking about it, you're conserving willpower. If you have to debate with yourself about what to eat for breakfast, you're depleting mental energy. If you eat the same healthy breakfast every day, you're preserving that energy for more important decisions. This is why successful people often seem to have boring routines. It's not that they lack creativity or spontaneity. It's that they've learned to automate the foundational behaviors that support their goals so that they can be creative and spontaneous in areas that actually matter. Steve Jobs wore the same outfit every day, not because he lacked fashion sense, but because he didn't want to waste decision-making energy on clothing when he could use that energy for product development. Barack Obama followed the same morning routine for 8 years as president, not because he was inflexible, but because routine gave him a stable foundation for handling unpredictable challenges. This principle applies to every area of life where you want to improve. Instead of trying to make better decisions in the moment, create systems that make good decisions automatic. Instead of relying on motivation to do the right thing, design your environment so that the right thing is the easiest thing. But here's where I need to address something that might be holding you back from implementing any of this. You might be thinking that this approach sounds too rigid, too boring, too limiting. You might worry that creating systems and routines will make your life feel mechanical and reduce your freedom. I understand this concern because I felt exactly the same way when I first started learning about discipline and systems. I thought that structure was the enemy of creativity. I thought that routine was the enemy of spontaneity. I thought that discipline was about forcing yourself to do things you didn't want to do. But I was completely wrong about all of this. And understanding why changed everything about how I approach life. Discipline doesn't limit your freedom. It creates freedom. Systems don't reduce your options. They expand your options by making you more capable in every area of your life. Think about it this way. If you're constantly struggling with basic life management, if you're always running late, always forgetting commitments, always stressed about money, always tired from poor sleep habits, how much freedom do you really have? You're trapped by your own lack of systems, even if you don't realize it. But if you have systems that automatically handle the foundational aspects of your life, you suddenly have enormous freedom to focus on what really matters to you. If your finances are automated, you don't have to worry about money constantly. If your health habits are systematized, you don't have to think about exercise and nutrition every day. If your work routines are optimized, you can accomplish more in less time and have more energy for relationships and personal interests. Discipline creates capacity, and capacity creates freedom. Let me give you a perfect example of this from my own life. Before I developed disciplined systems, I thought I was living freely because I didn't follow routines. I would wake up whenever I felt like it, work on whatever seemed interesting in the moment, eat whatever I was craving, go to bed when I got tired. It felt spontaneous and creative. But in reality, I was trapped. I was constantly stressed about deadlines because I didn't have predictable work habits. I was always tired because my sleep schedule was chaotic. I was frequently anxious about money because I didn't have systematic approaches to income and expenses. I had very little actual freedom because so much of my mental energy was consumed by basic life management. After I developed disciplined systems, something amazing happened. I had more genuine freedom than ever before. Because I knew exactly when I was going to work and what I was going to work on, I could fully relax during my off time without worrying about unfinished tasks. Because I had automated my finances, I could make purchases without stress. Because I had consistent health habits, I had more energy for spontaneous activities. The structure didn't limit my creativity. It provided a stable platform that allowed my creativity to flourish. The routine didn't make my life boring. It eliminated the boring stress of constantly managing basic logistics so that I could focus on interesting projects. This is what most people don't understand about discipline. It's not about doing the same thing every day forever. It's about creating reliable systems for the important but routine aspects of your life, so that you have maximum energy and attention available for the areas where you want to be creative and spontaneous. And this brings me to something I wish someone had told me years earlier. The most successful people in any field are not the ones with the most natural talent. They're not the ones with the best strategies. They're not the ones who got the luckiest breaks. They're the ones who develop the discipline to consistently execute whatever level of talent and strategy they have. I see this pattern everywhere once you know what to look for. In sports, the best players are rarely the most naturally gifted athletes. They're the ones who have the discipline to practice the fundamentals every day, even after they become famous. In business, the most successful entrepreneurs are rarely the ones with the most revolutionary ideas. They're the ones who have the discipline to execute consistently over years and decades. In creative fields, the most productive artists are rarely the ones who wait for inspiration to strike. They're the ones who have the discipline to show up and do the work every day, regardless of how they feel. In academic fields, the most accomplished researchers are rarely the ones with the highest IQs. They're the ones who have the discipline to pursue long-term projects methodically over many years. The pattern is always the same. Talent gets you started. Strategy gives you direction. But discipline determines how far you actually go. And here's what I find most encouraging about this reality. While you can't control how much natural talent you have, and while developing good strategies requires significant learning and experience, you can start building discipline today. Right now. With whatever circumstances you currently face. You don't need to wait for the perfect moment. You don't need to have your entire life figured out. You don't need to make dramatic changes all at once. You just need to choose one small area where you can practice consistency, and then gradually expand that consistency to other areas of your life. The compound interest of discipline doesn't care about your starting point. It only cares about your consistency over time. Someone who starts with modest talent but maintains disciplined practice for 10 years will almost always outperform someone who starts with exceptional talent but practices inconsistently. This is why I'm so passionate about helping people understand this distinction between strategy and discipline. Strategy is important, but it's also largely external. It's about analyzing markets, studying techniques, learning from experts. Discipline is internal. It's about building the capacity to execute whatever you learn consistently over time. And here's something that might surprise you. Developing discipline is actually more straightforward than developing strategy, even though most people find it harder. Strategy requires you to understand complex external systems that are constantly changing. Discipline requires you to understand one simple internal system that operates by consistent principles. The principles of discipline are the same whether you're trying to build a business, improve your health, strengthen relationships, or master a skill. Show up consistently. Start smaller than you think you need to. Focus on process rather than outcomes. Design systems that work with your natural tendencies. Use environmental design to make good choices easier than bad choices. Track your consistency rather than your results. These principles work because they're based on how human psychology actually functions, not on how we think it should function or how we wish it worked. They account for the fact that motivation is unreliable, willpower is finite, and change is difficult. They're designed to work even when you don't feel like doing the work. But here's the part that really matters for your life going forward. Understanding these principles intellectually is not enough. You have to implement them consistently over time to see results. And that's where most people get stuck, even after they understand what they should do. The gap between knowing and doing is where most potential gets lost. It's easy to read about discipline and think you understand it. It's much harder to actually build disciplined systems and stick with them when they're boring, when progress seems slow, when other approaches seem more exciting. This is why I want to end by giving you a specific challenge that will help you bridge that gap between understanding and implementation. I want you to choose one area of your life where you've been relying on strategy or motivation instead of discipline, and I want you to design one small system that you can implement starting tomorrow. Don't try to fix everything at once. Don't choose the most important area of your life. Don't create a system that requires major lifestyle changes. Choose something small enough that you have no excuse not to do it, but meaningful enough that doing it consistently would create positive momentum in your life. Maybe it's writing one paragraph every morning before checking your phone. Maybe it's doing 10 push-ups immediately after you brush your teeth. Maybe it's reading one page of a book before you go to bed. Maybe it's putting all your loose change in a jar every time you come home. The specific activity doesn't matter nearly as much as your commitment to doing it consistently. Here's what I want you to understand about this challenge. You're not just practicing whatever specific activity you choose. You're practicing the skill of discipline itself. You're training your brain to trust that you follow through on commitments to yourself. You're building the identity of someone who does what they say they're going to do. This identity shift will transfer to every other area of your life in ways you can't predict right now. The confidence you build by sticking to small commitments will give you the courage to make bigger commitments. The systems thinking you develop will help you approach all your goals more effectively. The consistency muscle you build will serve you for the rest of your life. But you have to start. You have to move beyond understanding these concepts to actually implementing them. You have to prove to yourself that you're capable of this kind of consistency, starting with something so small that failure would be embarrassing. And here's my promise to you. If you choose one small disciplined behavior and stick with it for 30 days, you will start to see yourself differently. You'll start to believe that you're the kind of person who follows through. You'll start to trust your own commitments. You'll start to see how powerful consistency can be, even in small doses. That shift in self-perception is worth more than any strategy I could teach you. Because once you know that you're capable of discipline in one area, you'll know that you're capable of discipline in any area. And once you have discipline, any strategy becomes possible. The most successful people I know aren't the ones with the best strategies. They're the ones who have learned to execute whatever strategy they have, with unwavering consistency over time. They've learned that discipline is the edge that makes everything else possible. Strategy is important. Learning is important. Planning is important. But discipline is what transforms all of that knowledge and planning into actual results in your life. Discipline is what separates the people who know what to do from the people who actually do it. And that brings me back to where we started, sitting in that 7-Eleven parking lot, staring at my phone, realizing that all my brilliant strategies meant nothing without the discipline to execute them consistently. That moment of complete failure became the foundation for everything I've accomplished since, because it taught me that discipline is not just one factor among many in success. Discipline is the foundation that makes everything else possible. It's the compound interest of human behavior. It's the difference between knowing and doing. It's the edge that separates people who achieve their goals from people who just talk about achieving their goals. You already have everything you need to start building this discipline. You don't need more information. You don't need better circumstances. You don't need more motivation. You just need to start small, start today, and commit to consistency over time. The question isn't whether you're capable of discipline. The question is whether you're willing to start small enough and be consistent enough to prove it to yourself. Everything else you want to achieve in your life is waiting on the other side of that proof. So here's what I need from you right now. I need you to stop watching this video and take action. Not tomorrow, not next week, right now. I need you to choose one small behavior that you can commit to doing every day for the next 30 days. I need you to write it down. I need you to plan exactly when and where you're going to do it. And then I need you to start. But before you go, I want to hear from you in the comments. Tell me what one small disciplined behavior you're going to commit to for the next 30 days. Be specific. Don't just say exercise more or eat better. Tell me exactly what you're going to do, when you're going to do it, and how you're going to track it. When you make that commitment public, you're not just choosing a behavior. You're choosing an identity. You're declaring that you're the kind of person who follows through on commitments. You're taking the first step toward becoming someone who has discipline as their edge. And if this video has helped you understand the difference between strategy and discipline, if it's shown you why consistency matters more than brilliance, if it's inspired you to start building the systems that will transform your life, then I need you to hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message. Help me reach more people who are ready to stop relying on strategies and start building discipline. Because here's what I know for certain, after losing everything and rebuilding it through discipline. The world doesn't need more people with brilliant strategies. The world needs more people with the discipline to execute whatever strategies they have consistently over time. The world needs more people who understand that discipline is the edge that makes everything else possible. You can be one of those people. You can start today. You can choose discipline over strategy, consistency over brilliance, systems over motivation. You can become the kind of person who achieves goals not because they're more talented or lucky or strategic than everyone else, but because they have the discipline to keep showing up long after everyone else has quit. The choice is yours. The time is now. I'll see you in the comments with your 30-day commitment, and I'll see you in the next video where we'll dive even deeper into the systems and strategies that make discipline sustainable over the long term. Until then, remember that discipline is your edge, and everything you want is waiting on the other side of consistency.